What if your calcium score is clean, but your arteries aren't? What if you're using the wrong type of stem cells and then you get some type of autoimmune disease later on in life? Well, today we're going to be talking about that with my guest, Dr. Khoshal of Rocky Mountain Regenerative Medicine, who's a trained MD working for the ER and left to build a prevention-first clinic. We talk about longevity the smart way, actual biomarkers that we have right now, all the testing we can do for that, why full body MRI, certain blood tests can spot trouble early. And we go on to talk about peptides, hormones, and other longevity modalities. He has a really cool story of one of his 80-year-old patients who I think you need to listen to. If you're over 40, you need to start thinking about your health span and start investing in your health the same way you do for retirement. Stay tuned.
So I keep talking about my SKOOL community that I'm on, and I've grown into about 100 members. And I'm really trying to help out the over 40 crowd, putting a platform out there that's better than Facebook groups. I really love this SKOOL setup. Having any type of discussion, if you can look at the tabs here, from general discussion to focusing on diet, movement, inflammation, stress, sleep, social life. And then I put my podcast episodes on here as well to make it an all-in-one episode. People comment, I answer questions daily. So this is just where I'm spending my time. On my calendar right here, if you look at the tabs up here, I throw in coffee chats every now and then just to have fun. I started doing more office hours. So I'm trying to hold these every other week, every 3 weeks, depending on the amount of people coming on. This is personal training, more in a group setting, but right now with how many people are coming on, it's a little more semi-private. Right now, my SKOOL cost is $20 a month, but if you pay for the year, you can get it down to like about $15 a month. And besides the access to me daily, you have video chat with office hours through Zoom every other week. And for some of you coming in, give me your schedule, give me your times, and I'll start throwing in something that works for you, knowing that other people might join as well. But right now, we're not that packed. You might even get one-on-one sessions with me. This is just something I really enjoy doing. I really want to build this up. And when I need to, I'll just start opening more office hours, more help, whatever anyone needs. And we'll just grow from there. So once again, check out the show notes for the link. Or if you just Google Over 40 Fitness Hacks SKOOL, SKOOL, I will be the first thing that pops up on Google with the SKOOL emblem right there. And you can sign up that way. Check us out. Hope to see you there. Dr. Khoshal, I just want to thank you for coming on my show. Real excited to talk about longevity, biomarkers, peptides, all the longevity stuff. My audience is new to this. We always started with kind of weight loss as our main goal, but after most of us are over 40, these are the things we need to look at too. So I've moved my podcast into that direction a little bit. So can't wait to get some insight of what you do with your company, Rocky Mountain Regenerative Medicine. But first, my audience always knows we want to get to know you a little bit. How'd you get into this? I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, well, I went to Dartmouth Medical School. The way it works in medical education is after you complete that basic medical training, you go to residency. So I went to residency in emergency medicine at Yale University in New Haven. After that, I hit the job market. I became what's called an attending. My first job out of residency was here in Colorado. My wife and I moved to Boulder, Colorado, and I started working in Denver. There's some realities about conventional medicine that started to hit me. We weren't making any long-lasting difference in patients' lives. What we were really good at is putting a Band-Aid on their problems, the problems that led them to the ER. But in terms of stopping them from coming to the ER at a future date for the same problem, we really weren't doing a great job of that. We were lacking there. And I started to look at some of my colleagues who'd been doing this for decades with a little bit of envy, like how are they making it last this long? I was a little discouraged by my circumstance, which was I'm just starting out my career and I can't believe I'm starting to get burned out to some extent. And so out of that, what came out of that was something, in my opinion, something beautiful, right? So what came out of that was me transitioning to a type of practice that really addressed problems on a long-term basis. I didn't want to just spend 5 minutes interacting with a patient. My idea for this clinic was to spend 90 minutes where we talk diagnostics, we get a good sense of what their goals, what their objectives are, what's hindering them from achieving those goals and objectives, and establishing a really strong longitudinal relationship with these patients. That was one of the sources of my burnout, is I wasn't spending enough time with these patients. Like I said before, I was putting Band-Aids on their problems, but I wasn't really getting to the root of those problems. And it turned out that was something that I was really missing. So I started this clinic with that in mind, is if I had to design a medical system from scratch, how would I go about doing that? And what I perceived as a weakness, where the nascent stage of my career where I was getting burned out, ended up being a strength, because my colleagues who'd been doing that for 40 years, for 50 years, they didn't have that advantage. And talking to them, they certainly would have changed something about their career trajectory early on, but they didn't have a role model perhaps, or that mindset where they could take the bull by the horns and do something about it instead of just tolerating a career for decades. For me, it was like, I need to do something about my career in the here and now. So now when I have interactions with patients and they ask, hey, doc, there's nothing wrong with me. I just want to optimize my body, my biology in the here and now. What do you have to offer? I no longer have a blank look on my face the way most doctors do. Imagine yourself going to your doctor and saying, hey, doc, there's nothing wrong with me. What do you have to offer me? Their answer usually is nothing. The reality is there's a lot that we can offer, whether that's peptides or stem cell therapy or other biologicals. There's a ton of stuff that we can do for these patients.
Are you set up like a DPC, direct primary care, where it's like membership cash-based system, or are you a clinic that can still take insurance, or is it like a hybrid?
That's a really good question. One of the things that I noticed that was wrong with the healthcare system is the involvement of insurance companies. Everybody needs health insurance for those catastrophes. You walk outside, you get hit by a car, or even something less dramatic. You come down with belly pain and it turns out that it's appendicitis. Those minor things have bankrupted families. You want to have insurance that's catastrophic, that'll cover you in the case of a true emergency. Insurance is also a double-edged sword, where if you're interested in optimizing your health, in preventing disease from taking root in the first place, insurance is not going to serve that well. The question for me when I started this clinic is whether I want to hire 10 administrators to deal with insurance companies, the negotiation back and forth. Even if I succeed in that endeavor, that success looks like this. I provide medical service, and then 6 months later, I get paid, and I'm paying somebody to go back and forth with the insurance company to recoup something that's not even going to be enough to pay that employee in the first place. Do I really want to involve myself with that? Or it's a concierge medical practice, it's cash pay. All of my patients have insurance. I just don't accept insurance here. And so that was a better model for me. It was born out of necessity, because when I first started out, I couldn't hire anybody but myself in the first place. Out of that has come something very sustainable, where the types of patients I'm seeing these days are truly invested in their health. They're definitely engaged. Oftentimes they'll walk in with papers in hand, like, hey, I just read about XYZ the other day. What do you think about this? So I'm constantly learning from them because they're so engaged. They also appreciate the financial investment in their health. I mean, everybody who's financially capable and responsible, they have some form of a retirement plan, for instance. And that speaks to envisioning what their life might look like several decades from now. So why not invest in the same manner in your health? Because if you have a heart attack, if you get a torn meniscus and it severely debilitates you, where you can't hike or bike or swim or do the types of things that bring you joy, well, who cares how much you save for retirement and never use it? So I think my patients do see it as an investment in their health.
I just see that's the new wave out there, is these concierge clinics or DPCs, where it's like a membership program. It's a concierge thing, but they actively do stuff for your membership. But for what you guys do, let's go into some of the optimization, longevity stuff. You get someone's blood work and let's assume it looks pretty good. That's what the normal Western health organizations will go through your markers on. What's some of the optimized stuff that you guys will take to the next level?
When I do diagnostics, we're not just doing diagnostics because an insurance company told us, hey, this is what we're going to compensate you for. That's the advantage of not taking insurance. So we do have a rhyme and reason for why we do things a certain way. When I approach diagnostic biomarkers, I take a step back and say, what are the most common causes of morbidity and mortality in the US? The CDC has been really good about keeping tabs on the most common causes of death. They include cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes. It includes diabetes and all the complications that stem from there. It includes cancer. It includes trauma beyond a certain age. I'm not talking about car accidents, but somebody falling and breaking a hip. And it turns out that those types of injuries have a really high complication and mortality rates. Those are the type of things that we want to be on the lookout for. That is what longevity boils down to. It's not getting somebody to live to age 200 or 300. These are unrealistic expectations, in my opinion. It's looking at what is killing Americans and how do you reduce that risk as much as possible, which brings me to point number 2. We start out with what are the most common causes of morbidity and mortality? And then we say, okay, what are the biomarkers that are highly reflective of your risk for one of those things? In conventional medicine, the tests that we order are dictated by insurance companies. They enlist the help of the cheapest tests. Well, the cheapest tests are not the best tests. So we have this disconnect between where medicine is in this country and where the science of it is. Every year, there's more tests that are coming online. Some of them happen to be better than what's commonly used, and some of them are no good. So how do you curate a list of tests that'll give you the type of information that you really require? We curate that list of tests that are highly reflective of what your true risk of cardiovascular disease and all these things I mentioned earlier. What does that risk profile look like? And then we test those biomarkers several times annually for all of our patients. The idea there is it's really insufficient to check somebody's biomarkers, even if they're the best once a year or once every 2 years, which is what insurance will do. That's what most Americans do. And so most Americans then fall off the wagon and they don't want to see their doctor because the review comes down to something that you mentioned earlier, which is everything looks good. Everything checks out. Well, what more can you say in a 15-minute appointment? But when we do these biomarkers, when we review them with a patient, we spend easily 60 minutes, 90 minutes, sometimes long, depending on what the biomarkers are. And we go through those biomarkers line by line where I explain to them what each of them mean as it pertains to their risk. And usually by the time that I'm doing that, I will have already had my notes. I would have looked at those biomarkers beforehand. As that meeting is wrapping up, I will send an email containing those notes and anything I jot down during our discussion to the patient. So they have a written record of it several months from the time of our meeting. When you're trying to figure out why you're taking a certain supplement and have no idea why, you can fall back to my notes and say, oh, this is why I'm taking it. And oh, I'm supposed to take it with food or in the morning. All those details will be included in there. We want to make it as stress-free for the patient as possible. We don't use a lot of medical jargon. If you can't explain it to somebody in simple terms where they can understand it, you probably don't understand whatever it is you're trying to explain. So we really want to break it down in a way that it's easy for the patient to follow. That's how we do things from a diagnostic standpoint. In terms of therapeutics, this brings us to a point where conventional medicine differs. Once you graduate from medical school, from residency, and you hit the job market, and you're seeing 30 patients in an 8-hour shift or a 12-hour shift, you just don't have a lot of time to then go home. Most doctors get their medical information from pharmaceutical reps who'll show up, take you out to lunch to a fancy place. They'll tell you about what it is they're selling specifically. They'll give you a prescription pad with your name at the top, and all you have to do is write down the patient's name. It's already been pre-filled out for you. They want to make it as mindless and as easy as possible. In doing that, they're altering the physician's behavior and changing how most physicians in this country get their education once they graduate from medical training. Yeah. And that's really unfortunate. There are therapies that don't have a drug rep advocating for them, and that includes a lot of biologicals. Why? Because it's hard to patent something that is naturally occurring. So a good example of that are stem cells. You have stem cells in your body. I have stem cells in my body. Their sole role is to repair, to regenerate tissue. And as a person is getting older, the number and quality of their naturally occurring stem cells are declining. It's happening in you, it's happening in me. It's one of the consequences of aging. Well, if you've got these cells that are trending downward, both in number and in terms of quality, it makes sense to take those cells and replicate them, have under sterile conditions to hundreds of times the number of similar cells that are in the body. And then you freeze those cells and use them incrementally for decades to come, depending on what your injury is. So I might deploy it now for your knee pain, for your knee injury, but a year from now, you might need it of an injured disc or an injured shoulder because your labrum is torn, and we would inject some of these stem cells in that context. The reason you don't have a drug rep pushing and talking about stem cells to physicians is because they're naturally occurring. And you can't apply a patent to something like that. That's naturally occurring. You don't see commercials for stem cell therapy, but you see them for Lunesta.
That's the biggest problem I've always had with the Western side is doctors going into all the big corporate healthcare systems and hospitals. They're told what education to get. They can't flourish and learn new stuff. That's the beauty of talking to all these independent people. Everyone seems to have a different specialty, different life experiences. And,
that's how you find out about it. Yeah, absolutely. I think doctors are intellectually curious. It's ingrained in us as part of the job. The question is, do they have sufficient time to do that? Doctors have the same stresses that everybody else has on them. They have kids, they have other family beyond that who have their own set of problems. And so you live in this ecosystem with a bunch of other people, all of whom have their own struggles. In an ideal world, you can carve out time to look through a journal. I think most doctors would say, great, I can do that. But you take on all these other obligations outside of medicine. There's only so many hours in the day. You're just not going to have enough bandwidth. A lot of primary doctors out there see 30 patients within a 10-hour shift, and then they're there documenting. I mean, that's just pure patient time. But outside of that, you're stuck documenting. I saw those primary doctors during my training, and it's tough to make family time and carve out time to learn about new things. And so I don't necessarily blame them. I think it's a consequence of the system that we've adopted. And nobody is going to change that unless you have the type of experience that I did, where you lift up your head and say, hey, I don't think I was made out for just running on this hamster wheel. I need to think about a different way of practicing medicine.
Dr. Khoshal, what are some of the biomarkers? Maybe, I mean, there's a million of them. Talk about some of the cool ones, and what biomarkers are you looking at? And then what modalities or treatments like stem cells is the thing to do to try to solve them? Like, what are some of these out there? I know for me, I've done a gut health test, which is really cool, seeing what's going on inside of me. I know there's genetic testing out there. I'm not sure how you feel about that stuff, but there's just so many different tests, cancer tests, everything.
Let me talk about some of those diagnostic tests. The ones that I'm excited about is a test that looks for DNA that looks different than normal DNA. Why is that important? All of our cells have a finite lifespan. If you look at any tissue, there's an average turnover of cells where old cells die, new cells come in and take their place. And that process can be messy where the cells die.
Yeah.
When they die, they release their contents. That includes proteins and DNA material, and your immune system responds to that to clear away that debris. Well, before they have an opportunity to do that, especially if the number of cells that are dying are really high in number, protein, some of that DNA is going to make its way into the bloodstream. And you can look for that DNA through these tests in the bloodstream. And if it turns out that those cells that are dying are cancerous cells, well, somebody figured out that that cancerous DNA does look different than normal DNA. And so there's a really good cancer screening test that's resulted as a consequence of that. And so we will very commonly employ that for our patients. It's not a perfect test, like most tests are not perfect, but some of these cancers, we don't even have a test to compare it to. And so you do an imperfect test. If it's pointing towards a certain diagnosis, you can follow that up with imaging, like a full body MRI, a focused MRI, or any other diagnostic test, like a PET scan. If they're all pointing in the same direction, meaning this patient does have cancer and this is not a false positive, you can act on that. Again, it's not a test that is very commonly done in conventional medicine, but we do it for our patients. There are really interesting imaging modalities that look for cardiovascular disease, very commonly used for my patients, especially those who are at high risk of cardiovascular disease. You may have heard of calcium score CTs. Mm-hmm. Look for calcium deposits within the coronary vessels of the heart, but it turns out that deposition of calcium in the coronary vessels is a late stage finding, meaning you can have plaque buildup, you can have blockage in an artery for decades before it calcified. And then if you do a calcium score CT, it'll detect that calcium and it'll say your calcium score is XYZ. But you ideally want to catch that blockage way before it calcifies. And so there's really good imaging modalities that will look for non-calcified plaque within the coronary vessels. I've had a lot of patients who have a 0 calcium score and are falsely reassured that they're not at higher risk for a heart attack or strokes But again, these patients are in their 40s, they're in their 50s, maybe even their 60s, but they're not old enough to have calcified plaque in their coronary vessels. So it's the wrong test for them. A
Yeah.
calcium score CT is not the ideal test for that individual. When I have them undergo one of these other scans that looks for soft plaque, non-calcified plaque, it turns out they have a ton of blockage in their coronary vessels. And we ought to be doing something about that in the here and now. Now, the second part of your question is, what can you deploy stem cells for? These are not necessarily instances where I would reach for stem cell therapy. If they have cancer, there's really good conventional therapies for that. The problem with cancer is we don't catch it early enough. It highlights the need for aggressive diagnostics early on. You could be doing a lot of things right in your life, and it turns out there's a cancer brewing and you didn't catch it until 10 years too late, then it's too late, unfortunately. Whatever progress we've made over the last few decades in terms of cancer therapy, they're going to be meaningless because we caught it way too late. So it be aggressive diagnostically early on. When it comes to cardiovascular disease, there's really good therapies that we can institute early on. But if it turns out that you have a heart attack or you have a stroke or you have liver damage or kidney damage, in that instance, absolutely, we would deploy stem cell therapy. I have plenty of patients who haven't had anything catastrophic happen to their body, but they appreciate the fact that just by virtue of being alive, your body is going to take a beating, whether it's metabolic, whether you're aware of it or not. For those individuals, they'll come in once every 6 months or annually, and we'll give them an infusion, an IV injection of their own stem cells. These cells are alive. They respond to chemical signals of injury wherever they might be coming from. And so they'll hone in on specific areas of damage. If they have orthopedic injuries, which are common, we would do an MRI to figure out what's going on with a particular joint that's aching and bothering you. And then under ultrasound or x-ray guidance, we go in with a needle and inject stem cells exactly where the patient is hurting or what we see on the MRI to bring about healing and regeneration at that particular area. So
Yeah. For stem cells, you mentioned using your own stem cells, creating more. If you're an 80-year-old man, are those stem cells good enough to replicate, or would you ever use different animal ones that are close enough? When do you make the call on that?
Yeah, there's two sort of categories of stem cell therapy. One is called autologous, which means it's harvested from your own body. The other one is allogenic, which means they're from umbilical cord or placental tissue. The thinking used to be if you use a younger person's stem cells, it makes sense. Usually they're more spry, they're more robust. The problem with that is you're always going to introduce somebody else's proteins into your body, and your immune system is going to notice that. And you are going to get a surge of antibodies targeting those foreign proteins because your immune system doesn't know if you're under invasion by a pathogen or if these are cells that are meant to heal you. The long-term repercussions of that is that mechanism for producing antibodies is not fail-safe. Sometimes if there's enough similarity between your own native proteins and those foreign proteins that you just made antibodies against, you can have those antibodies start to attack your own body. That's what's referred to as autoimmune disease. And there's a plethora of these diseases that are relatively common, unfortunately, including rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's, Hashimoto's, type 1 diabetes. There's dozens of these types of diseases that afflict millions of people. And you don't want to potentiate autoimmune disease by using somebody else's cells. A much better option is to use stem cells that are derived from your own body, augmented in terms of number and quality. To the other question that you asked is this difference between an 80-year-old and a newborn stem cells. I think there is a lot of truth to that. The quality of your stem cells is declining. The oldest patients that I've done stem cell therapy on were a couple of 80-year-olds. They're a husband and wife team. And it was the wife that I did that procedure on first. And she had scoliosis, which is an abnormal curvature of the spine. She had a lot of arthritis to the point when she woke up in the morning, she would spend 2 hours in bed stretching just to prep herself to get out of bed because she was that stiff and in that much discomfort. She certainly couldn't do a lot of activities of daily living because of that limitation. When she saw me, she had already been evaluated by several surgeons, all of whom recommended a complete spine fusion, which is a major surgery. She's very well educated. And she said, at my age, I just don't think I'm going to survive a total spine fusion. I agreed with her. And I think several of the surgeons agreed with her that it was going to be a 50-50 chance if she was going to make it through that surgery. And she said, look, I have a lot of life to live and I don't want to go under the knife if it means I may not wake up. So I want to try stem cell therapy. I brought up to her what you just brought up, which is you're 80 years old. I just don't know if your stem cells are going to be robust enough. And she said, do it. Like, if it's going to give me any chance, even if it's a low chance, that's what I want to do. We ended up replicating her cells. As these cells are multiplying in that petri dish, they're competing with one another for limited nutrients, limited resources in that environment. And it's the cells that are able to outcompete their peers that are going to survive for the ensuing generations. And so this is what natural selection is, constantly selecting for better and better cells. So that does happen, and the quality of those cells improve. And so that's what we're taking and reintroducing. I injected this patient 4 years ago, and she's now 84 years old, hasn't required surgery, is doing significantly better compared to where she was about a year ago. She emailed me because her daughter was getting married and she was tasked with making the cake for the daughter's wedding. And she did really well, making the cake, doing household chores, getting out of bed. This is a person who had surgery waiting for her in the short term. And now she's several years out from the stem cell procedure, just one procedure, and hasn't required any of that. So she's doing really well. And so is her husband, who had some other orthopedic issues. I have done it in older individuals, 80-year-olds, and they've done well.
I know I hear people talking about this, different banks. There's sperm banks, right? You can freeze all this stuff. And then there's stem cell banks doing the same thing, that the younger you can get it in that bank to help you later in life. For this reason you're talking about, we should be spending our money and worrying about that.
I think the earlier you do it, the better off you are. If you do it in your 40s, in your 50s, is it better than your 80s? Absolutely. But sometimes time only marches in one direction. So if an 80-year-old shows up, I can't dial back the clock. You got to take what you're working with and sort of go from there. The other part of your question that I'm not even sure you're aware that you asked this, but here you go. There are companies out there that will talk to expectant parents and they'll say, save your kids' stem cells. What you need to realize is that those companies will take the products of conception, whether it's the placenta, the umbilical cord, and freeze it. Stem cells, other cells, all together, sort of. And that's not a big deal. You can do that. But where I really strongly disagree with these companies is they don't culture expand. They don't replicate those cells. So when you do need them, they'll send you everything that was frozen and they'll leave it up to your doctor to separate the stem cells from the non-stem cells. Even then, the cells haven't been replicated. So it might contain one stem cell. It might contain 100,000 stem cells. Nobody really knows. And then a lot of times, this is the other thing that I don't agree with. There's been reports of contaminants, pathogens that were frozen. And they did an assessment when the tissue was first received in the lab. They don't share that with the parents. That's information they should be sharing. The parents aren't paying an annual fee to these banks when what's frozen isn't even usable. There was a New York Times story about that very thing published in 2018. It talks about these stem cell banks and that scammy aspect of it. And it was a huge turnoff, but like there's other things I think wrong with that model as well that we're probably not going to have time to get into. The thing that I like about the lab and the way that we do things is taking your own stem cells, replicating them. We've worked with pediatric patients. We've worked with geriatric patients. And it works in both populations, in both extremes of life. So
yeah. What do you do for your patients who are 30s, 40s that want to freeze it for later? Can you guys do that? Or you still have to go to an outside bank to?
No, we bring them here. We do the liposuction here in our procedure room. And then we send that to the lab, which separates out the stem cells and replicates it and freezes it.
Okay. Is there a cost to holding it or just the cost of the one-time replication?
An annual fee of $350 for that they refer to as a maintenance fee. It's charged annually, whether you use those cells or not.
There is still a fee for that. That's probably hindering a lot of people from going out and doing it, but time is of the essence. With the younger you are.
Yes, if there's patients who are going down to Mexico, Panama, or Colombia, that doesn't make sense. You look at all the research about stem cell therapy, about 65% of it comes from the US. A vast majority of the rest of it comes from China. And so to go to other countries, you have no idea what it is you're getting. It might work, it might not work, but there's little recourse. I think in terms of marketing, these international places in Mexico and Colombia and Panama are clearly doing a great job because it is attracting a lot of Americans to go down. And they all do it slightly differently. So there are some differences that a lot of patients should take into account and learn about the nuances of the different types of stem cell therapy. That's not going to be explained in an ad on Facebook or a 5-minute ad on YouTube. It's unfortunate because most people will sign up thinking they're getting one thing, and in actuality, they're getting somebody else's cells. And to me, like, that part doesn't make a lot of sense. Will you see good come from using somebody else's cells? Absolutely. But the downside, the long-term repercussions is that we know it increases the patient's risk of developing an autoimmune disease, and that may not take root for another 5 years. By then, it's too late. Like, the cells are inside of you. You're making antibodies against your own tissue at this point, and it negates any benefit that you would have seen from that form of stem cell therapy. It doesn't happen in everybody, but why step on a landmine? Potential that it might harm you.
I think it's better just use your own for sure. Well, Dr. Khoshal, I wanted to ask you, since you already mentioned doing CT scans on calcification in your heart. I've done that, been clear to that. I always like doing all these different tests to check on everything. I wanted to ask you about my father's in his 80s, 82, I believe, and Western medicine only waits until you actually have the horrible symptoms, which is already stuff starting from 5-10 years ago. But he ended up getting atherosclerosis in his arteries in his legs. When the normal test they do is right here, like in the neck, the carotid arteries, nothing there. So their thing was, okay, don't worry about it then. Now he has 90 to 95% blockages in both legs. And they didn't even catch the other leg until 2 years later when the next problem happened. What are some of the things that we can do? I always ask my dad, but he's that old school Western medicine scholar. Why don't we have full scans that can just check everything? Why are we always waiting for symptoms?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, one of the things that we do is a full body MRI on our patients, and that would have caught your dad's problem.
That's what I'm saying. Why are they doing just one section? Give me all of it.
Yeah, it's definitely frustrating. When we order imaging, we don't do any imaging other than what we use to guide a needle in the context of an injection, where we'll use an ultrasound or an x-ray. But these more advanced scans like MRIs and CTAs and PET scans, like, we don't do them here. Oh, I explain that to patients and tell them there's no financial incentive for me to either order or not order this test. But I think this is what's needed in your case, and this is why it makes sense for you. There's doctors' offices right down the street from us where they have an ultrasound machine by which they image the carotid vessels. And so guess which test they're going to order? The carotid scan, because that's how they get compensated. But a carotid scan is really going to shed light on the extent of or narrowing in what you're imaging. It's really tough to extrapolate from that what's going on in the legs. And so for me, those types of scans, there was certainly a day and age when you could argue there's no radiation associated with an ultrasound, whereas there is if you were to get a CT scan. But these days, MRIs have gotten so good that there's no risk of radiation with an MRI. Why not just get a full body MRI? In some instances, it might be cost prohibitive, but you really do need to think about your health as an investment. Whatever you pay into it right now, it's going to pay dividends down the line. I have a lot of patients. This was especially true when I was working in the ER, where a patient would be brought in from the nursing home. They're in their 70s, 80s, not that old. Some of them certainly in their 90s, but they have really advanced dementia. They have really advanced cardiovascular disease. They have no idea where they are. If you think about those patients and imagine you were talking to them when they were in their 40s or 50s, did they envision their life being that way where they're not even aware if they're alive or not? No, they didn't. If you asked them, they would tell you, yes, I'm saving up for retirement and I want to take this trip and I want to go on such and such hike and I want to bike around Canada or Europe or whatever the case might be. Nobody envisions their future as there being a surgical hole here through which they do their breathing. There's a surgical in their belly through which they gain their nutrition. They can't even taste their food. Nobody says that. I think most people out there really ought to be thinking about their health, especially decades down the line, as they do about their retirement, and invest in it in a similar fashion. Because if you want to get the most out of life, you want to get the most enjoyment, do with life what it was intended for, get the most out of it, you need to invest in it. And that's where you don't want to just leave it up to your doctor to tell you about medications or to your orthopedic surgeon to tell you about surgery. You really want to learn more about it and get with a doctor who is aligned with your objectives, your goals, who is really invested in using biological therapies, the best diagnostics. We didn't really get to talk about peptides and hormones, but these are things we do at our clinic. If you ask your average doctor what they think about stem cell therapy or PRP or peptides, BPC-157, thymosin beta, or different types of hormones, like they have no idea. And hormones should be within their wheelhouse. I can't tell you how many female patients I've come across where they're talking to their OBGYN about perimenopause symptoms and get a dismissive shoulder shrug. It's like, yeah, this is part of getting old, nothing to do about it. Imagine being a woman thinking you're the only one going through perimenopause. You think you're going out of your mind, you're going crazy, and then going to the one doctor who is female usually. That's what most OBGYN, and them looking at you like, yeah, like you're supposed to get old and these are the symptoms to be expected. There's no solution that's being offered. It's frustrating.
Yeah, that's why you got to take health into your own hands for sure. That's why I started doing it.
So,
Dr. Khoshal, before we get into where we can get a hold of you and all that, do you have any other final thoughts and stuff you're excited about that you're seeing in the next 5-10 years?
yeah, the next 5 or 10 years, I think stem cell therapy is really evolving. The lab that we work with, they're already trying to figure out what the language of stem cells are. In other words, when they arrive on scene, there's a little bit of dialogue that takes place between the stem cells and the injured cell. So the next phase of evolution for stem cell therapy is figuring out the nuances of what that language looks like. When you're replicating these cells in a lab, and a certain portion of those cells are destined for your knee or your shoulder, you can expose those cells to chemicals, teaching them where they're going to be injected and what they should expect once they're introduced. So it really abbreviates the time it takes for those stem cells to go to work because they're already primed for where they're going to be injected way before they're reintroduced into the body. That's where I see the near future of stem cell therapy. But definitely for your listeners, and I've come across a lot of patients who are really invested in employing peptides or hormones or stem cell therapy. And then you ask them like what their nutrition looks like or what their exercise looks like. And it turns out they're not exercising at all and they just want that easy fix. And I just want to let them know there's no easy fix. Like you got to exercise. There's really no replacement for it. You got to eat right. You got to check those boxes for sure. You got to have a good social life. That's going to contribute to longevity. And then once you have those bases covered, you start looking outside of that for peptides and hormones and stem cells and PRP, et cetera.
Yeah, that's get your basics going. And that's like my world in personal training, getting you started on your health plan, building muscle, getting the base of your longevity, and then getting to those next steps. But Dr. Khoshal, how can my audience get a hold of you? Any social medias or newsletters? You take emails, or how does someone get to Colorado?
Yeah, our website is rmrmco.com. And that's basically the acronym for our practice, Rocky Mountain Regenerative Medicine. And then we have all of our social media handles there. We're located in Boulder, Colorado. We have a lot of patients here locally, and a significant part of our patient base flies in either from abroad or from other locations here in the US. What makes it great is that Boulder's a beautiful place, so it's a bit of a destination medicine. Come and check us out.
We were talking before we hit record that you have to do one visit first so you can do telehealth after that.
I'm happy to meet with patients online through a teleportal like this. But at some point, like, yeah, definitely we want to see the patient in front of us. And that's where the benefit of living in Colorado, like you can make a trip out of it. And we just had a patient who visited us from Indiana. We have another patient here today from Kentucky. We definitely have these patients coming in. I think where technology is these days is great because you can do a meeting like this and get a lot out of it. But there's really no replacement for sitting across a table and going through biomarkers or doing a procedure. So it makes a lot of sense to make that trip.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's awesome that you can do that setup. My audience always knows I'll put all those links in the show notes, so it's easily clickable. Dr. Khoshal, I just want to thank you again for coming on my show and enlightening us. It's been great.
Thanks for having me, Brad.